I wish my marriage hadn't ended the way that it did. I'm Jenny Gage, and this is Life Take Two, where I share how I escaped from Mormon trad wife life. And as I share the story of my marriage struggling and then becoming really toxic and really abusive, and then grinding to a halt with divorce after 24 years, I hear from a lot of you about things that you're going through in your relationships. I hear stories of women who have been brutally harmed by their husbands. I hear stories of women who are just unhappy with their husbands, and some who are just kind of mildly annoyed. And a lot of these women ask me, do you think that my marriage will last, or do you think that it's over? And I wish I had a crystal ball so that I could give you the right answer, but I don't. And I didn't have that crystal ball for myself either. But I did have a really good gut feeling, and I chose to ignore it for years. What I can tell you is this: I wish that my marriage hadn't ended the way that it did. I wish that I had listened to that inner voice years before. Let's dive into this. First, let me introduce you to somebody. This is Jake. When I met him, he was a freshly returned Mormon missionary, and we were married super quick. Within 6 weeks from the time we met till the time we walked into the Portland, Oregon temple to say I do. Fast forward 24 years, here's how my marriage with Jake ended. One night, I woke up in my bed, all tangled up in the sheets with Jake, had to go to the bathroom. While walking past the nightstand, I decided, for reasons that you can hear all about in all of my other videos, that I should maybe take a little peek at his phone just to see what was going on in there. And what I discovered is that while I had been gone that evening, he was Googling where to pick up 19-year-old escorts in Phoenix, Arizona. I put a tracker in his phone. The next night, I would follow my husband of 24 years to a QT gas station somewhere on the outskirts of Phoenix, where a woman appeared to get in his car. And a couple hours later, we would end up back at home together. And here are the words that I said that ended our marriage. I told him, "A man that does this to me doesn't get to sleep in my bed. This is over." And I was forced to file for divorce. At first, I was really happy that I had caught the adultery that night because it gave me a lot of clarity. It gave me a solid reason to end that relationship, to tear my family apart, and to go out and build my own life. I knew that our marriage was over beyond the shadow of a doubt, and I didn't have to question it. But in the 6 years since that night, I deeply regret that I hadn't spoken my truth in the years before and ended it in the moments that I knew that it was over. I'm going to share a couple of those moments with you. Number one, our wedding reception was an absolute nightmare. Jake spent most of the wedding avoiding me, hanging out with his buddies, making fun of me, and eventually would shove the cake in my face, get chocolate ganache all over the front of a very expensive wedding dress that my parents had sacrificed a lot to be able to provide for me, and would then blow up at me and spend the rest of the reception sitting at a table with his guy friends by himself while I sat in the bridal room crying my eyes out. My professional photographer took multiple pictures of me in that beautiful bride's room. It had these gorgeous floor to ceiling windows, and I guess my gown and my veil looked really pretty, but I had my face in my hand and was sobbing at my wedding. And I wish that that 20-year-old girl would have stood up from that bride's room, would have walked out to that little round table by the lake, and would have looked Jake in the eyes and said, "This is over. You don't get to treat me like this at my wedding. It's the end. Goodbye." There were two things that kept me from doing that. The big obvious one was that a lot of money had just been spent on this wedding reception. And the second one is that I had just taken covenants that I was told by the Mormon religion meant something, that I would be with this person for time and all of eternity. So I didn't see an exit option for myself at all. I was stuck. Imagine, though, that sliding doors moment, how my life would have changed if I had just thrown the bouquet at his face and stomped away. Number two, our wedding night. After the creepy Mormon temple wedding and then our horrible wedding reception, we would go to the Marriott Hotel on the waterfront in Portland, Oregon, have terrible sex, and then we kind of sat there discussing what we were going to do for the night. I was exhausted. I had stayed up for the past 2 nights making my own bouquet, painting my nails, doing my facial, bleaching my teeth, getting ready for a wedding and a wedding reception. And I could barely stay awake. I was so tired that I remember shaking. And Jake blew up at me in this hotel room. It was late, maybe 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And I remember him standing in front of the window just screaming at me and saying, "We have a waterfront hotel in Portland, Oregon that I've just paid for. I want to go out and see if there's any restaurants open and walk along the river and enjoy myself. So if you're fucking not coming with me, then I'm going to do it myself." So Jake walked out the hotel room door. This was 1995 when we didn't have cell phones. I had no way to contact him. I didn't know where he was. So here's what I did. I put on my cute little lingerie that I bought just for my wedding night, and I freshened up my hair and my makeup. And I sat in a chair in my high heels with my little 20-year-old skinny tan legs folded, waiting for him to walk back in the door. I would fall asleep in that chair on my wedding night, trying not to cry. He would come home around 4 o'clock in the morning, home to the hotel room, and he would instantly start a cycle that would last throughout the next 24 years of blaming me for everything. He would yell at me again and say, "Well, why did I have to stay inside on our wedding night in this great hotel when there's so many great things to do out there?" And he never really offered an explanation of where he had been, what he had done. He wasn't sorry that he had been gone. And in that moment, I just wanted to grab my little suitcase, put on a flannel and a pair of jeans, and have him drive me home to my mom's house. I stood there crying and shaking and thinking, my whole entire life I've pictured what it's like to be married. And you picture your wedding night and you picture having these conversations together and just the bonding and the magic of we're going to spend the rest of our lives hand in hand. We are, you twain shall be one flesh, all of those amazing things. And instead, my husband abandoned me. 50-year-old Jenny wishes that 20-year-old girl had put on that flannel, put on those jeans, and said, "Drive me to my mom's house. This is over." By silently standing there and letting him treat me like that, I was sending him a message loud and clear that it was okay to treat me like that. And he would. What happened was we went to bed together, had sex a couple more times, and the next day I just tried to act like nothing had happened. In 2012, it was discovered that I had an ovarian tumor. I would have surgery to remove the large growth from my abdomen. And in the month and a half between the discovery of the growth and the surgical removal, we had no way of knowing if it was some deadly form of cancer that would take me out or if it was something less innocuous. So, as I was coming out from under anesthesia, I apparently was really distressed and was crying for the doctor and just asking, "Is it cancer? Am I going to die?" Just so you all know, it wasn't cancer. It was a benign tumor the size of a grapefruit. It caused a lot of problems, but clearly I'm still here today. Though I would have a near death experience caused by sepsis from a super bacteria in the hospital just 10 days after waking up from that surgery. I don't remember asking for the doctor. I don't remember any of that. I remember waking up after an exhausting surgery, coming out of anesthesia, and having my husband's hands on my shoulders as I was laying in the bed in the recovery room, screaming in my face with spit actually hitting my skin and yelling, "Stop screaming!" I do have a crystal clear memory of everything after I felt his hands and heard the screaming. And I can still literally close my eyes today, 12 years later, and picture what the curtains looked like hanging from the ceiling around my recovery bed and what the ceiling looked like, what Jake was wearing, and the nurse's face as she came running over to my bed, opened those curtains, peeked her head through, and asked Jake to walk away. She would tell me to hold on for a minute, go to the desk, the little nurse's station, and she would come back with a clipboard that had an abuse questionnaire. That abuse questionnaire right at the top was like, "Are you in danger from your partner? Are you being abused?" It had a picture of a body, is he hurting you? Where is he hurting you? How is he hurting you? And I was terrified of Jake. We had 4 children at home. I had just had surgery. I was completely financially dependent on him. I needed my health care. I needed him to help me take a bath and feed me. I had nowhere to go. I had nobody else who could help me through this time. And there was no possible way that I could have said yes. So I circled no. The nurse looks at me, Jenny, Jenny, what is going on? And she asked me, are you safe being released into this man's care and going home with him? In that moment, I knew that he was a monster. I knew that I wasn't safe. I knew that he hated me. I just explained it all away. He's just upset. He's been stressed out too, not knowing if this is cancer and if I'm going to die. And he probably hasn't gotten any sleep, taking care of 4 kids. I'm fine. This is not normal, Jake. And I just wonder what would have happened in that moment if I had said, please help me. Please, please, please help me. I wonder if the resources that I thought weren't there may have been there. I wonder if friends and family would have stepped in and helped me. I was so afraid that I couldn't do any of it on my own that I decided to go back to a man who hated me and had abused me because I needed his care. A year into our marriage, one night, Jake would tell me that we had appointments with our Mormon stake president. I thought that maybe we were getting a calling in the ward, so off I went to the stake president's office, and the stake president sat us down and got us started with a prayer. And then he told me, your husband has been meeting with me for several weeks because he wants a divorce. And tonight we're going to talk to you about it. Jake had never mentioned to me that he wanted a divorce. Our marriage was terrible. So I don't know why it was such a shock. I just still believed in marriage and Heavenly Father was going to fix our relationship. And the stake president had Jake do something wild. He said, would you please tell Sister Green what you've been sharing with me about why you want a divorce? And I don't remember a lot of what Jake said, like, Jenny's not fun. We're not compatible. Uh, she just wants to work all the time and I want to go party with my friends, whatever. I don't even remember 99% of what he said. But at one point, he turns to me and he says, I'm not even attracted to you. And he kind of gestures towards me like this. He's like, when you take your clothes off and like I'm supposed to be intimate with you, I'm not turned on at all. You're not my type at all. I remember sitting there in that little chair in the stake president's office as a 20-year-old girl. And that feeling of every ounce of self-esteem that I've ever had in me has just been scorched to death. And we still stayed together for 23 more years because the stake president told us that we couldn't break our temple covenants or we would burn in hell forever, aka the Mormon celestial kingdom. Staying together was completely against every instinct in my body that I had. Little 20-year-old me sat there in that chair thinking, this can't work. I remember thinking, he hates me. How are we going to build a family and make this work? Just a lot of common sense things. And yet I got talked into staying and honoring my temple covenant. How would my life have been different if that little 20-year-old blonde had stood up from that chair and said, I'm not attracted to you either. And by the way, your is about a half an inch too short to do any good. It's not reaching the right spots. Your Arkansas accent grates on my nerves. And I hate your truck. Dear mom, she was a psycho. Last story. This is number 5. And this is the moment that bothers me the most, that I bring up in therapy all the time, that I have diary entries about, because if I had listened to my gut in this moment, it would have changed so much of the future that would come after. About a year and a half before my marriage ended, after I had discovered adultery and my husband and I had separated, I began to reconcile with him because I was financially dependent. I was lonely. I was still struggling with health issues and I just didn't see any other options. So we started to work on our marriage. And I had this moment of hope that we could actually fall back in love together. Like, we can have a happy life. Jake was in the middle of his love bomb phase, so it's not like this was unfounded. One Saturday morning, we woke up, had breakfast together, and I asked Jake if he wanted to walk over to the Ogden Farmers Market with me. And I was really excited. It felt good to be getting back together with my husband and having the kids together. And again, I was just in this fairy tale romance, like, yes, Jesus is going to fix everything and we're going to be just fine. I remember as I was opening the door to walk out of our condo, asking Jake a question. I said, out of curiosity, and I don't know what made me think to ask this question. If we weren't married and I was just a girl that you had met on Tinder, and I texted you this morning and asked you if you wanted to go to the farmer's market with Jenny, who is not your wife, would you have said yes? And would you be excited about it? And my husband stood by that door and said, no, absolutely not. I'm doing this because it's husband duty. That's a quote. And once I got over the shock, I asked him why. And he went on a little rant about why would I want to go to a farmer's market and walk around while you pick out the perfect tomato and like the most fragrant goat milk soap and then have to pay for your breakfast at what was it called? Chicken and waffle. While you sit there while I'm trying to eat my chicken and waffle, blah, 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 telling me about the latest book that you've been reading while I am bored out of my mind because I don't give a fuck. And you guys, I put the keys in my pocket, put my cell phone in my pocket, and walked out the door with that man to the farmer's market. He would spend the next year and a half abusing me. And eventually, the marriage would end, and I would experience life threatening post separation abuse, financial abandonment, and just a lot of terrorism and trauma. And I don't think that I could have avoided all of that by ending the marriage in that moment, but I could have avoided a lot of it. I was in a better personal position at that time with a lot of family around me than I would be eventually, but it would have changed the power dynamic. Our marriage wouldn't have ended because he picked some 19-year-old escort over me. It would have been me saying, I'm no longer doing this. I'm no longer willing to self abandon, be treated like dog poop. I'm no longer willing to just go along with a man who hates me because I said I do and put a ring on it 22 years ago. Imagine if 44-year-old Jenny had just let him walk out that door a couple steps ahead of me, shut the door, locked the door, called the divorce attorney, changed the locks, gone into the closet, and I don't know, thrown all of his clothes off the balcony. And I know that me and all of you have reasons why sometimes you are stuck. But sometimes we make ourselves stuck by prioritizing what other people think and what other people have told us about the permanence of marriage, our inability to survive without these guys. And we've put ourselves in a trap with no walls. I wish that instead of caring more about the money that my mom spent on my wedding dress, or the fact that I had just told somebody in a temple that I promised to be with this guy forever, what some Mormon stake president thought of me, I wish that instead of trying to duct tape my dysfunctional family together for my kids, that I had listened to the truth that my soul was screaming at me. In the end, I think that our aversion to divorce is keeping a lot of us from living our best lives.